Hello everyone, it's Gary here again with another training session for Vegas Pro. Today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the color grading tools in Vegas Pro and see if I can give you some ideas on how you can approach color grading in your projects. Now, after last week's live training, I took a little bit of heat from somebody who felt like I didn't go into quite enough detail on each of the individual compositing modes that I talked about, and I didn't give specific examples of each one of those. So I just want to make it clear up front today that I'm not a colorist. I'm not here to teach you the art of color grading or color correction. What I hope to be able to teach you is the tools in Vegas Pro that are available for you to do that kind of correction and use the skills that you already have or that you would learn from somebody who's much more qualified to teach you the art of color grading than I am. I get the commenter's point, and he has a good point, I suppose, but I'm just not qualified to teach you color grading today, but I can show you the tools in Vegas Pro that you can use to do the color grading with the knowledge you have or can acquire from somebody who's more qualified. So that out of the way, let's get started talking about color grading in Vegas Pro. Let me just move my picture out of the way here so you can see the screen, and let's take a look at what we've got here. So I've got Vegas Pro open in front of me obviously here, and hopefully you can see that now. And I'm going to talk we'll spend most of our time in the new color grading panel that was released in Vegas Pro 17. We'll talk about video scopes and give you some ideas on how you can use those. And then along the way, I'll mention a couple of other tools that can be very helpful. So let's just start by adding a clip to the timeline. I'm going to right-click and drag it into my timeline and choose video only again since we don't need the audio, and I'll just say yes to that. So all I've got here is a clip of a truck rolling through, and a pretty simple clip. But let's take a look at this clip a little bit more closely. You can see, maybe you can see that there's kind of a blue tint to like the white side of the truck, and maybe it's kind of muddy in the darks and so forth. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that if you're trying to do color correction or color grading on your computer monitor or an external computer monitor, you might have difficulty getting accurate colors because your monitor very well may not be calibrated for proper color work. If you're going to use your eyes to do your color correction work, then you need to make sure you've got a properly calibrated monitor. I don't. So in my case, I'm going to be making corrections and they might look okay to me here on my screen, but they might not be real. That's where the video scopes come in, and so we'll spend a lot of time talking about video scopes and how you can use them to analyze your video and your colors even though you don't have a calibrated monitor. Okay, so let's move into this clip a little bit. Right about here is fine. And I'm going to open up the color grading panel. Oh, before I open up the color grading panel, here's one tool that's often overlooked that I really want to show you that can be super helpful when you're color grading. I'm going to take another clip to show you this. I'll take another clip and put it on the timeline. It's totally unrelated to the first clip. It's just another shot of another vehicle driving by. But I'm using it because it's quite a bit different in look. It's got a lot of greens as opposed to this more urban one. And what I want to show you is the split screen function of the preview window. Let's just use our imaginations for a moment and say that these two clips were actually of the same scene, but from two different cameras. And we want to match the colors of one camera to the other color so it looks consistent when you switch between cameras. So in this case, they're wildly different just for demonstration purposes, but in the normal use case, they'd probably be similar. They'd be of the same scene from two different angles with two different cameras. But what I want to show you is that when you're doing color matching work like that, you can use the split screen function in Vegas Pro to keep your eye on the reference clip while you're correcting the other clip. So let's say this clip that you see in my video preview window right now is the reference clip. What I'm going to do is to take a snapshot of that using the copy snapshot to clipboard button. I take a snapshot of that frame, and now that frame is on my clipboard. Now I can come to my other clip. So this is the clip I want to match to the clip I just made a reference of. And what would be helpful is to be able to see both clips at the same time. What I can do is use my split screen view. I'll hit the drop down arrow and I'll say clipboard. And I can select the left half or the right half or all of the image. So let's just go to clipboard and let's just say I'm going to select the left half of the image. So now when I update, you can see that on the left half is my reference clip, and on the right half is the clip I want to correct. So if I'm doing some sort of color correction, let's just jump into the color grading panel here quickly. And if I play my project, if I play through this clip, you can see that the left half is just a still image. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. Let me dismiss that. Sorry about that. You can see that the left half is my still image, my reference clip, and the right half, if I play this, you'll see is the video as it moves through. So now I can use whatever tools in my color grading panel to make a change to this. I'll just make some strange drastic change, and you can see that I'm changing just the one that I'm working on, but my reference clip stays the same. So in theory, I would be able to match the colors of my clip that I'm working with my reference clip. Now, as I said, you can have the left half, you can have the right half, or if you, this is a piece that people often miss, if you just click and drag within the preview window, you can take any area of that reference clip that you want and show it through while you're doing color correction on the other, on your target clip. So this split screen tool is really powerful and really helpful, but comes with a little caveat, and that is don't forget to turn it off. We often get calls to the tech support line saying half of my video is frozen and it won't move and I can't see it, and a lot of times it's because somebody left this split screen view on, and Vegas is doing exactly what you asked it to do. It's splitting the screen. So when you're done with it, make sure you turn it off so that you see your entire clip again. Okay, let me reset this, and let's talk about the scopes. You notice that when I went into the color grading panel, if I close the color grading panel again, the scopes close. When I open the color grading panel, the scopes open up. And what really happens is the color grading panel remembers whether your scope was open or closed. So if you open the color grading panel and you don't see the scopes up here, it's because you closed it at some point and the color grading panel remembered that setting. So if that happens, just go to the View menu, choose View, Window, and the Scopes, the Video Scopes window is under the Window menu, the View menu. So you can just reopen it. It's a dockable window, so you can move it wherever you want to move it. You can dock it off. Let's say I move it over here, and you can make it bigger, and so forth. So it's just like any other docking window, just like the preview window. I can take that off and dock that wherever I want to dock. So in this case, I'm going to dock them. I'm going to take them both off and let them float a little bit so I can make them bigger so that you can see the results of what I'm doing here. Okay, so let's talk about the scopes. Well, let's talk about the color grading panel real quickly. Let me just run through some of the tools down here. The color grading panel is broken up into three general sections. The first section by default shows you the color wheels. The second section shows you by default the color curves. And then the third section is this finishing tab over here that has various buttons for bypassing your color work or resetting and closing and so forth. Let's go back over to the tabs in the first section and just kind of run through those real quickly again. The first tab is the Input LUT tab. LUT stands for lookup table, and essentially what a lookup table is just a table of mathematical formulas that turn the color in your video to some other color in your video based on that lookup table. Now there are two places in the color grading panel where you would access lookup tables. The first is the one you're looking at right here, and the second one is way at the end of the chain over here. So why are there two places? The first one is, you can use these however you want to, but the first one is basically mostly intended for you to add a camera LUT. So if you're shooting with a camera that shoots in a logarithmic format, then when you put that footage on your timeline, it probably doesn't look quite right. It looks washed out. It just doesn't look vibrant. And that's because the camera may require, the footage from that camera may require a lookup table to translate from the camera to what you're seeing on your computer. And so you would put that LUT here as the first thing in your color grading chain as the camera LUT, and that's why we call it the camera LUT. Next are the color wheels, and we'll take a look at these in a few minutes. Color channels, which are essentially letting you control the same things that the color wheels let you control, just another mechanism for doing that, and some people prefer one, some the other. And some tasks might work better with the wheels, whereas some tasks might work better with the slider controls on the color channels tab. The input-output tab includes a level sliders and controls. This you can use for increasing and decreasing some of the levels for creating more contrast or washing out your video and so forth. And you can see as I'm adjusting these that it's changing the darkness and brightness of my video. And just reset those moves. Independent controls here for saturation and exposure. We'll take a look at those in a second as well. Then in the next panel, as by default, were the color curves. These are a really powerful tool, and you have curves for the combination of red, green, and blue, and each individual channel as you see fit to use. There's also some white balancing and some auto-adjusting things that you can do down in here. And then on the HSL tab, hue, saturation, and luminance controls for, just various moves that you might want to make, like saturation takes it colored out and so forth. And then the finishing tab, and we'll take a look at some of these things in a moment. You've already seen me using the reset button a couple of different times to reset some of these moves that I've been making. So let's set it back to the default configuration with the color wheels and the color curves, and then let's start doing some adjustments, making some adjustments, and talking a little bit about the scopes. There are 4 different video scopes in Vegas Pro, and they're all listed in the drop-down list. First one that we're looking at right now is the vector scope, and the vector scope essentially gives you information about your colors and the saturation level of those colors. So let's go back to the input-output tab where I have a saturation control and an exposure control. You can see in my vector scope here that my colors are trending out in this direction. And you can see these targets. Here's cyan, here's blue, magenta, red, yellow, and green. So you can see that my colors are tending out towards the blue and cyan, which if you look at the video preview window makes a lot of sense because you've got the blue truck and the blue on the side of the truck. If I change, let's just for a moment, I will close the color grading panel and change the frame that I'm at in my video here and go back into my color grading panel. Now you can see the distribution is a little bit different because now there are more reds in here, there's some greens up here, so it's not quite trending quite as much to the blues since the blues are smaller, they take up a smaller portion of the video. And I should mention that a lot of what we're showing here is really just Vegas Pro. Some of these tools are available in Vegas Movie Studios, but these, like the vector scopes, are really just Vegas Pro. So we're really talking about Vegas Pro in this. However, speaking of Vegas Movie Studio, we did release the new version, version 17 of Vegas Movie Studio yesterday, so if you're interested in that, take a look. But for now, we're talking strictly about Vegas Pro. So the vector scope shows colors and saturation. If I take all of the saturation out of, well, let's crank the saturation all the way up. As I do, you see the color distribution in the scope widening out, and you see more vibrant colors in the video. In fact, it looks starting to look a little cartoonish because the colors are so saturated. If I go the other way and I pull all the color out, pretty soon, when we get down to a saturation of 0, all you see is one dot in the very center of the vector scope because there is no color for it to show you. Let's reset it to its default and see what we've got here. So the vector scope is really important for you, especially if you're delivering for broadcast, because your colors need to be within broadcast legal limits. If you were to make a line that went from the center of the cyan target to the blue target to the magenta target all the way around, that line that connects all of these, or those lines that connect all of these, represent essentially the legal limit for broadcast. So if you see colors that are falling outside of where that line would be, then you are in danger of having oversaturated colors that might get rejected by whoever you're, whatever broadcaster you're sending your project to. Definitely, if you're reaching the 100 line here, the 100% mark, if you're reaching that or over that, then you are in danger of having your material rejected from a broadcaster. So use the vector scope to take a quick look and make sure that all of your colors are legal and they're within the limits. So the vector scope is all about color and saturation. Let's move on to the waveform. The waveform is sort of an interesting look at your video. What it shows from left to right are the frames in your video. And you can see, if you look at my video, from left to right are the frames of the video. From bottom to top is brightness level. So if we look at my video, you can see there's a real bright patch of sky up here, which is almost white because it's so bright. And you can see that represented by this line at the top here, where those brightnesses have just been sort of clipped off at the top because they're so bright. You can see vaguely the outline of the edge of the truck, the rear of the truck, right in here. That would be this area right here. Real highlighted brights there. These brights, you think you don't see them because you don't see them going here, but remember, we're not showing up and down, we're not showing the footage, we're showing brightness. And since that's such a bright element, which is already added to this bright element, you see that up in here. So what's interesting about this, if let me move my preview window just a little bit out of the way and my scope a little bit out of the way so you can see this. If I play this, I have this button selected, the Update Scopes with While Playing button. When you have that selected and you play through your video, you can see the scopes changing dynamically as you play your project. And in a second I'll do this, but while I'm doing this, notice these bottles on the side of the truck. You can see these bottles as they move through, and in fact, here they are in the vector scope right here. The darkness would be the dark, or not the vector scope, but the waveform. The darkness would be these dark areas right here, and these brights would be the white in between the bottles. So let me go back to the beginning and play that and watch the waveform, and you'll see those the truck kind of go by and those bottles come by. So here we go, and there are the bottles. Right? So it's an interesting way to view your video. You're watching frames from left to right, but you're watching brightness from top to bottom. Now, how does this help us? Well, let's take a look at this again, and let me just find a good frame that gives us a lot of variation. If you look at if you look at the waveform, you can see that, yeah, we have this part up here that's blown out, and there's not really anything we can do about that because it just got clicked on the camera because it was so bright out in the sky when we shot this clip. But you can also see that the brightest part of the truck right here really doesn't come all the way up to 100, and so it looks like we're not using all of the dynamic range available to us in this clip. So that's where we would come down to our color grading panel and try a couple of different things. Maybe it's as simple as bringing up the exposure and brightening it up. So if I bring the exposure up, now I've brought those light areas up to my 100 line, and I've spread out my brightness levels a bit, and I have a brighter, more vibrant piece of video. And maybe that's the only correction you need. If I come over here and I click toggle back and forth the bypass color grading button, you can see the difference between the corrected exposure now, and if I turn it off, what it looked like before. So you can see in the video preview window, you can see the picture getting darker, and in the waveform, you can see the waveform jumping up when I turn it on. Okay, so the waveform is a good way to judge your brightness levels and whether you're using the dynamic range of brightness available to you. Next is the histogram. And the histogram is another tool that gives you another view of the brightness of your footage. Now, I've already added some exposure to this, so it looks fairly even, but if I bypass it, you can see that this is just another way to see that we were kind of low on some of those brights that we added by bringing up the exposure. So if I turn it back on, you can see this histogram change in reaction to the video brightness that I added as well. Now, there are still maybe some blacks that we could bring out here according to the histogram, and so we aren't able to do that with just the simple exposure tool. Maybe we can play with our levels a little bit here and even that out. So what I'm looking for is a nice even distribution of colors. Now again, please, I'm not a colorist, so I may be not showing you the right thing as far as exactly what you should be looking for in each one of these scopes, and you should do some of your own research to figure that piece of it out. But you can see how the tools enable you to make those corrections. Let me reset all of this. And we're already at 25 minutes into this training. I think I'm probably going to go over here a little bit just to keep moving. So I hope that's okay with you if we go for a little bit longer today, because I don't think I'm going to get through even the basic stuff, the basic parts of this that I wanted to show you in a half hour. Let's go look at another scope. And this scope is an interesting one, and it seems like it's kind of often overlooked, but I really like this scope. It's called the RGB Parade. And it's similar, it's showing you something similar to what the waveform showed us, but it's broken up by color. So I can see the red component, the green component, and the blue component. And the reason this can be so helpful, and the reason I like it so much, is that you can tell at a real glance, real quickly, you can tell how's my color balance. If you look at the video preview window, it seems like we've got a blue tint going, like the white of the truck seems kind of bluish, and the road and so forth. It just feels like there's too much blue in this by looking at it. And if you look at the RGB Parade, you can see that blue is the strongest color. It reaches the highest level. Green would be the second highest, and then red is way down here. So if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, well, I want to balance my colors a little bit, then I need some tools that will let me go in and work with individual colors. And there are a couple of different ways we can do this. We can say, well, first of all, the whole thing seems, as we saw before, it seems like it doesn't really quite reach the top, 255 in this case being the top. We're pretty short way down here. So one thing I might say is I want to bring these highs up more to the 255 level, and to do that I can use the gain slider and just bring that up, and you can see the blues coming up, the greens coming up, and so forth. Now I've taken the blues about as high as they can go without going over the limit, so I can't really go any farther than that. If I A-B this and see it without its change, you can already see the change that I'm making. It's a little bit brighter, just as we would have expected. The blacks, if I look at the blacks, they're a little bit off my zero line. They're right down in here. So to maybe I can add some blacks to again take full advantage of the dynamic range. And so I might come down to my lift slider and start playing with this and bring those blacks down a little bit. If I come too far, you can see that they start piling up on the bottom here, and the video preview window actually obviously doesn't look good. But if I'm just careful about it, I can bring those blacks down and maybe just open that up a little bit. So now I've brought my brights up with the gain slider. I've brought my blacks down a little bit with the lift slider, and if I A-B this, you can start seeing we've got a little bit more contrast and a little bit better use of the dynamic range in that video. But now let's start talking about the individual colors themselves, because remember the red is way down here, the blue is way to the top, and the green falls somewhere in the middle. So how can I fix that problem? Well, we can fiddle with the wheels, but in this case, I don't think the wheels really give us what we need. So let's maybe instead go to the color channels. Now here I can work with lift, gamma, and gain for the individual colors with sliders. So maybe let's just say that the red dark shadows need to come up. So maybe I will move those up, and you can see that it's bringing up the top of the red, but it's also bringing up the middles of the reds, and we're moving away from the bottom. So that's really not an effective correction. What about the highs? If I bring the highs of the red up, okay, that's a little bit better. It's bringing the red up and basically leaving the darks down in here. So that was the better target for what I'm trying to accomplish here. But I'm noticing that my midtones are sort of moving away from where the midtones of the greens and the blues are. So maybe I would bring my midtones down a little bit with the red gamma slider. And you can see how they kind of play off of each other. And so I bring one up, I bring the other one down, and I'm just trying to equalize these waveforms in the RGB Parade to try to balance my colors. Another way we could be doing this is with the color curves themselves. So let's just reset all of this, and we're back to where we were before. But now I can see that I want to bring my reds up, and I want to bring the tops of my reds up while leaving the mids of my reds relatively simple, or relatively untouched. So I can turn on my red curve, and since I want to adjust just the top, if I start using the curve handles, I am adjusting the top, but because of the curve, I'm also adjusting the middle. So let's reset that, and instead I'm going to put another point in the middle of the curve here. And now when I adjust the top, it's not adjusting so much the bottom. Oops, I put that in the wrong. I want the red channel. So let's get the red one and put a point there. And now I can more easily just control the tops, the brights of my reds instead of the whole thing. So I might want to bring my reds up to there, let's say. Maybe I need to bring my greens up a little bit. So let's do the same thing with the greens. And you can see how using the color curves, I can break my color curve up into several different segments, and then use the Bezier handles to dial in what I'm trying to accomplish there. And finally, the blues need to come up a little bit as well. So let's bring those up. And again, I'm looking here to see, oh, what have I done? I've made something that doesn't look quite right, even though it looks okay here. Still, my reds are a little bit weak. And so it's a combination of looking at your scopes and using your eyeballs to see if you've got the right correction in place. So let me reset all those again. So hopefully you can see that there's various tools in here give you control of your colors either as a whole with, like a global change, or with individual colors. Like if I use the RGB curve, I can bring the brightness up of the whole thing. This is similar to what we were doing before with saturation or the exposure curve. We were just brightening it up. And I'm just taking more advantage of my dynamic range. So if I A/B this, you can see in the video preview window that I've now got a more vibrant, better contrast. And now that I've made that change, maybe it makes more sense now to go in and start working with individual colors in either like the level slider or in the red curve like I was a moment ago. And you just kind of keep working with this stuff until you start feeling like you're getting the results that you're after and that things feel pretty even. And so let me A/B that and show you the difference. Okay, now it looks like I may have gone a little bit too far and overexposed this, but hopefully you're getting the idea of how you can control these things on an individual level. Let's take a quick look at a couple of the other tools off to the side here. The one in particular that I want to show you is the Bezier masking tool. If I click Bezier Mask, a couple of interesting things happen. It opens up my video event effects window, it adds a Bezier mask to my chain, and it applies that Bezier mask to my video. The important thing, one of the important things that I wanted to make sure that you understand here is that when you add a color grading to your project, when you open up the color grading panel and you start working on an event, what you're actually doing is adding the color grading tool to a chain on the event level of that event. And this is important to understand, and I'll give you a couple of reasons why in just a second here. But for now, when we click the Bezier Mask button over here, it adds a Bezier mask to it, and it masks out the video, and we can do whatever we want with it. So let's say we want this to be our Bezier mask. Now, why is this important, and why did we put it here at the end of this chain? Because in the Bezier mask, along with all the tools of the Bezier masking that you can work with, under the general options is a option to mask just the effect. So if I click this checkbox, what you see now is that just what's inside of the Bezier mask is being affected by my color corrections, and everything outside it is not. Now, it's a little difficult to see that right now, but if I go do something drastic in the color grading panel, you can see that it's just what's inside the Bezier mask that's being affected by the color grading panel. So why might this be important? Well, maybe you've got a video of a person and it's a bright day, they're standing under a shade tree or something, and you can't really see their face because the camera was blown out by the bright sun. You could go into the color grading panel, you could make a Bezier mask that just covers the person's face, and then you can use your color grading tools to brighten the face or add whatever correction to that masked image in that masked area that you want to. Okay, now as long as we're here in the video event effects window, there's another important thing for you to remember and to understand why it's important to remember that the color grading is part of the effect chain for that effect. And that is, if you have made color correction on one clip and you want to add it to another clip or multiple clips in your project, then you can easily come in and say, okay, this is my color grading that I want, and you can come in and save this chain as a plug-in package that you can, I'll just put test, that you can now go in and apply to other events in your projects. So if I look in my filter packages now, here's my test that I just created. So it's important to remember that this is part of the color grading, the effects chain, so that you can create a preset, and then later, maybe I want that preset applied to this clip here. I can go to my color grading chain and my filter packages, and I'm not sure which one of these it actually is because I have two of them. One's trying to be called test and the other one's not. Okay, so there I've applied something else to it. So just remember that you can always save these settings as a plugin package, and here's the look that I created a moment ago, now applied to the other piece of video. The other thing that's important to remember in this panel, at the finishing panel at the right, is that you can export your color grading settings as a LUT. So if I've got all these settings and I want to export those as a LUT that I can bring into another project, like I showed you a moment ago with the input LUT or the look LUT. I don't think I ever made it to the look LUT, but the look LUT is for if you want some sort of special effect look on your footage, you can apply a look LUT. In fact, let me just reset this and reset this, and let's go and take the Bezier Mask off of this, and I'll apply a quick look LUT to this clip, just to, I could do that, you know, I could just browse to it and apply it, and apply the look to the clip. So if I browse, here I've got a LUT, and now you see it instantly changes the look of the clip because it's going to the lookup table, it's doing the math that is in the lookup table, and changing the colors in my video based on what's in the lookup table. Okay, and I can reset that. Okay, so that's a pretty quick look at some of the color grading tools in Vegas Pro 17 with the video scopes we talked about, with the color grading panel that we've talked about. One more thing to mention is that when you go to, let's close the color grading panel and let's go to the video effects tab. You can do an awful lot using the color grading panel as we have been using, but there are a ton of other effects in Vegas Pro that you can use for color match. You've got color grading, color match, and so forth. And if you go down to the folder to the Vegas folder in your video effects window here and take a look at the folders that we have in here, there are several folders, and one of them is color, and that contains all of the individual color grading and color correction plugins that you can access. And you can easily put them in the chain with or without the color grading panel. So if I have the color grading panel open, let's say I just make some crazy change here, and I close the color grading panel, I could come into my individual color tools and say, yeah, well, let's add this to the chain as well. And now I can change it based on that control. So the color grading panel, super powerful, but not your only option for color grading. You've got all of these others in here as well. Okay, so I've made a complete mess of this video now, but I think I can easily take that off, and I can easily reset my color grading panel to the default, and then we could start all over. Okay. So I think that about wraps it up for this video. I'm already 10 minutes over time here, so let me get this back up, and I hope that this quick look at the color grading panel, the video scopes, some of the other tools that we use for color grading that are available for you to use for color grading in Vegas Pro has helped you. Again, I realize fully that I didn't teach you how to color grade. I didn't teach you the art of when you should make certain adjustments, and I didn't even really teach you how to read the scopes. But at least you now know that those tools are there. You have a little bit of an understanding of how they do work, and you can continue your education with somebody who actually does know something about the art of color correction. But now you can apply that learning in Vegas Pro because you know where the tools are. All right, hopefully that gave you a good idea. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell if you want to be alerted every time we go live with another training. This wraps up the trainings that we had planned for April. They've been extremely popular, so I'm sure we're going to be doing more of these. I can't promise that I'm going to be able to do them every week, but we will be doing more, and we'll let you know in the future on our social media pages. So if you're not following us on here on YouTube or on Facebook, then follow us on those locations, and we'll let you know when we're having another training. So for now, I'm going to stop the stream, give it about 10 15 seconds to make sure everything buffers through, and then I will see you next time. Thanks for joining. Bye.